There you go. If you
Wait,
did get
Professor
the,
Partita, what did you say? You kind of cut off.
oh, so I sent out an email yesterday about the worksheet number 8. And as I was combing through it, I realized what I had missed. What I had gotten was worksheet number 9 by worksheet number 8. Why do your emails go into my junk mail? I don't know. Your email hates me. Um, you could always add it as a function to not just to add me to your directory, and it'll won't send
Also,
it to
you
me.
got the date wrong.
Yeah, the date was wrong as well too. So, thanks, Josh, for pointing out my flaws. My brokenness is evident.
I don't say that to be facetious. I just say
Yeah, I know. It was a mess. Just come on, man. Give me a break. Partita's giving out extra credit. Now's not the time to start pointing that stuff out. I'm just messing with you, man. No, again, it was just a lot of stuff was missing. Again, as I was coming through it, I realized that wasn't the one I had missed. Um, so if you hadn't gotten the email, the worksheet due for today was extra credit. So back-to-back weeks, you're working on extra credit. Again, just helps you to bank on points later on if you're taking an extra week for spring break and decide, okay, maybe not work on the worksheet because I'm just going to soak in all of Partita's wisdom in lecture and the reading. And so, which I say is a wise decision, but it's something that you're going to have to decide for yourself. Yeah. On him. Yep. So that being said, the worksheet due today will be counted as extra credit. I know there's some parts that kind of were disconnected. I went through and updated it. So if you do want to work on it, again, it's the same thing as worksheet number 7. If you'd like to turn it in as a later time, feel free to do so, and you'll get extra credit for that as well. You're welcome. So there's that. There's I believe that's it. Worksheet number 9, again, due next Thursday, and then we'll have spring break after that, which I'm sure we're all looking forward to. But are there any questions, comments, concerns thus far? All right. So there's a couple things that we left off with last class, and of course I'm not going to be too long today because mostly because of time. And we'll pick a lot of this back up next class, especially Day of Atonement. But we had left off specifically talking about sacrifices and offerings being the means of approaching the Lord, and that sacrifices aren't the substance of the relationship itself, but rather the covenants are, and that it's God who initiates covenant, God who initiates relationship, and how he invites participation through the sacrificial system in order to make the relationship right. And so much of the basis for the covenants are Sinai and what's happening with the patriarchs. So Mosaic covenant and Abrahamic covenant, Mosaic covenant, Abrahamic covenant, Mosaic covenant, Abrahamic covenant. And you're going to want to know that, possibly for a future quiz, that what are the two covenants that the sacrifices rely on? And that the covenant at Sinai spells out what kind of nation that Yahweh intends the people to be. There's a kind of privilege and responsibility that yes, these people are God's treasured possession, a holy priesthood, a royal priesthood, and a holy nation. There you go. There are certain privileges of Yahweh picking out Israel, not because they're the strongest, but rather because they were the weakest. That he brings them to himself. But with that privilege comes a responsibility, which is demonstrated again in keeping covenant, keeping Torah. There are certain privileges. Again, there was, and I need to point this out, that when I say privilege, it's not something that can be revoked, as in like driving or something like that, where driving is a privilege. That where it's something that's not necessary, but rather it's a special kind of order or special orientation between God and these people. And mind you, it was nothing they did themselves that made them any more beloved or precious to Yahweh, to have earned covenant, to have earned sacrificial system, to have earned deliverance. And so I do need to bring that up. that it's not something that can be earned, but rather given freely as a gift from God. But in light of that gift, there is a responsibility that is assumed. Again, if we take driving again, for example, that as drivers, we have responsibility not to hit the person next to us, not to hit people that are walking, pedestrians, not to be consuming or have participated in illicit beverages or uh, paraphernalia before we're driving that compromises our ability. And so again, we're held responsible for certain activities. And likewise, in some of the same ways that Israel is held responsible to keeping their end of the bargain called covenant. And that having Yahweh as their God entails a kind of conformity to a certain character, which is God's own character. The making or shaping of God's people to reflect, to be like him in the world, which again goes back to Yahweh, or to be humans being made in the image of God. These kinds of reflections of God in the world. So if Sinai covenant, Mosaic covenant is concerned with how to be Yahweh's people, the sacrificial system helps the people to stay God's people, that is, to stay in relationship with Yahweh. So if Sinai covenant is concerned with how of covenant, the sacrificial system is concerned with how did they stay a part of this covenant. Does that make sense? Because again, I do need to tie these two together because we need to have them kind of, they're partnered together, but they're not one and the same. Then when we talk about sacrifice and covenant, like they're definitely interrelated, as you guys can see. But what we can't confuse is the parts and the roles that we play, especially with Israel's system and the way that they understand their participation in the relationship with God and what that entails. That it's highly, highly relational. God initiates relationship with Israel. Israel responds in obedience of keeping not just the sacrificial system, but keeping covenant. Not just with keeping the sacrificial system, but with keeping covenant. And again, I talked about in the prophets how the people will keep this, but will refuse covenant. As in, you're not going to have any other gods before me. And what does Israel do? They participate in idolatry, but still participate in sacrificial system. So they strained a gnat to swallow a camel, if we can use a biblical saying. And so some of the sacrifices and offerings you will see there, you will have read this in your reading, so I won't go over it too much. But you'll see the similarities there between burnt offerings, grain offerings, peace offerings. The ordering's a little bit different, but it's still the same. Peace offering, purification, purification, reparation, reparation offering. And so for the burnt offering, that it's expected that the best of the animals would be offered to God. And although this is an expensive or costly offering, there is an allowance made. There's a kind of sliding scale for those who are poor and unable to make this kind of sacrifice. So what do? They offer a dove or a young pigeon. And you'll notice the same thing holds true in the New Testament. Where Jesus turns over the money changers' tables, that's because of the upcharges for the doves or pigeons. Again, which causes Jesus to lash out. Because again, this kind of taking advantage of the poor. And so it is a bit of extortion that if they want to participate but are prohibited because again, these exorbitant costs which prohibit them. But again, that understanding what's going on here and why Jesus is so upset. Again, the people who desire to respond faithfully to covenant yet are prohibited to do so because of greed. That God's the one who allows those who are economically disadvantaged to make adjustments, but yet those who are greedy decide to take advantage of it. So There's your New Testament teaching for the day. All right. So this specific offering is a little distinguished again because of the whole burnt offering that's placed there. And you have it placed first, both first sets again, indicating the kind of importance that this offering is in the systems, both for the people and for the priests. And it's an aroma pleasing to the Lord. Yahweh loves himself some barbecue, because that's essentially what you have. You have these animals that are being burnt, grilled. Grain offering is the only offering that doesn't involve animals. It involves some kind of barley, wheat, grain, most likely barley, because that's what they have out there. And similar to the burnt offering, it's intended to make Yahweh happy, content. You'll see in some of your readings that it'll say it had pleased the Lord, but literally in Hebrew, it made Yahweh happy. Brought a smile to his face. And so again, it sounds a little cheesy, but this is what restoration and relationship does to God when relationships are restored. And so again, you can see some of the significance. If you jump into the New Testament, you can see some of the significance here. And to also note at the end in Revelation, it's marked by a lot of eating. A lot of eating, a lot of feasts. Only a portion is burnt, and the rest is given to priests for their special service. And you have peace offerings. I won't go through the whole thing because it's a whole process, as you guys can see, and you guys read about it already. But this always involved a meal with others. And this peace offering indicates shalom. It's not just peace, like we're good, right? And you never talk again. No, but rather wholeness, healing is indicated by this word shalom. Kind of restoration back to the whole. And you'll notice, again, it always involves a meal. That it's Yahweh, again, breaking bread with the people and the people breaking bread with one another. And then a couple of different offerings, one of them being purification. The emphasis here is on blood, used to cleanse items within the tabernacle, and the others used to expiate, cleanse, or atone items from sin. And the other is reparation, which uses a ram. And priests alone are permitted to eat the meat. Aside from the high cholesterol parts, because Yahweh's concerned that they don't get clogged arteries, I guess. Then sacrifice is intended to compensate God for wrongs committed against him. And again, we need to bring this up because, again, this takes into account the context of relationship. Again, that covenant is the foundation for all of this. And set within that context is the sacrificial system, which again, the reparation of wrongs that have been committed against Yahweh. Let me are there any questions so far? Any questions so far as you guys did your reading on sacrificial systems? And again, my hope is that this will sound weird, but it brings some moisture back to these dry parts of scripture where it seems really bland, really boring. You just got to read through it. It's super legalistic. But again, to see the kind of the different layers to these texts that's being communicated of how Yahweh is providing the means of the restoration of relationship between humanity or his people and himself. And everything rooted within the context of relationship and covenant. So even if it relates strictly to the priesthood of which you and I are now a part through Jesus, and that's what that's what Peter calls us. That again, to see the varied ways in which God has demonstrated his desire for repaired and ongoing relationship with humanity and with his people specifically.
So you could say that, actually, I think you might have put this on one of the slides, that like
Do
the
it.
sacrificial system is like communion kind of.
We'll talk about that next class, especially with Day of Atonement.
Okay.
Yeah, because we're talking about shed blood, bodies that was given over and killed, and the celebration around that of restored relationship with God. Yeah, we'll talk about that with Day of Atonement. Kind of is the climax of all that.
So essentially, the goal is have a relationship with God. In order to do that, they have to keep the covenant. In order to keep the covenant, they partook in the sacrificial system, right?
So it's God who initiates the covenant of which they agreed to, and then the shedding of blood. It kind of, again, it follows this pattern where grace precedes law, that there's something that's been done or initiated on their behalf, and now what they're being invited into is to participate through obedience. But that it wasn't, it's not as though they sacrifice in order to start a covenant, um, or even in order to keep or maintain covenant. Because again, what the prophets bring up is that it's absolutely possible for the people, absolutely possible for the people to keep covenant but not keep Torah, or keep covenant, or keep sacrifice without keeping covenant. And again, it's especially with the covenant, Mosaic covenant, where there's specific um, commandments given, like no idolatry. You're not going to kill each other. You're not going to steal from each other. You're not going to take Yahweh's name in vain. You're not going to do these things. But instead, you're going to do these things. And a lot more is spelled out in Deuteronomy, and it'll make more sense when we get there. But that's the intention of covenant. But when sin does get introduced, the sacrificial system provides a way to deal with sin when it occurs in the context of covenant keeping, not just in covenant breaking intentionally. And so, again, the thought is that should sin get in the way of faithfulness, there's a way to deal with it. Not so much that when there is purposeful rebellion, and again, when you have this kind of breaking the two tablets when covenant is broken, then there's reparation that needs to happen, which sacrificial system helps to do too. But again, it's in the context of the desire to want to keep covenant, not just keeping the sacrificial system, which are two different things. So, all right. Are there any other questions, comments, concerns? All right.